You know the feeling? You're driving, maybe you're a little late, and then you see it. The flashing red lights. The gate comes down, and you just settle in for what feels like a really long, frustrating wait. I mean, it's annoying, right? But those gates, they're there to keep us safe. Or are they? Well, the data tells a much more complicated and, honestly, a much more dangerous story.
So, just how serious is this? Well, according to the Transportation Research Board, a collision between a car and a train at one of these crossings is about 40 times more likely to kill you than any other kind of car accident. Yeah, 40. That's a huge number, and it kind of puts that moment of impatience into a much, much darker perspective.
And that really gets us to the central puzzle we're going to unpack here. We're not just talking about some forgotten crossing out in the country with a rusty old sign. Nope, we are talking about the ones with all the bells and whistles, flashing lights, gates that physically block the road. You know, the most sophisticated systems we have. So why are these supposedly safe crossings still so incredibly deadly? Okay, this is where it gets really weird when you look at the numbers. Only about 8% of all public rail crossings in the country have these fancy automatic gates. But they're responsible for a whopping 15% of all accidents. So the very places we've spent the most money to make safe are still these hotspots for tragedy. To figure why, we've got to look under the hood of the system itself.
The tech that controls these gates, it's actually surprisingly simple, and its design is really at the heart of this whole problem. So before we get into the psychology of it all, let's do a quick breakdown of how these systems even know a train is on its way.
The whole thing works because of something called a track circuit. Just imagine the two rails of a track are basically wires in a giant electrical circuit. When there's no train, that circuit is complete, everything's fine. But the second a train rolls onto that section of track, its metal wheels and axle connect the two rails, which creates a short circuit. The system sees that change and bam, the lights start flashing and the gates drop. Pretty simple.
Now this is where it gets interesting. There are two main ways this track circuit gets used. First, there's the fixed distance system. The best way to think about this one is like a simple tripwire that's set, let's say, a mile down the track. It doesn't care if it's a super fast passenger train or a slow-moving freight train, the alarm goes off at that exact same spot. Then you have the constant warning time system. Now, this one's a lot smarter. Think of it more like a radar gun. It actually measures the train's speed and then calculates the perfect moment to trigger the signals so that you, the driver, get the same amount of warning time every single time. And believe me, that difference, it is everything.
And this is where we get to the heart of the problem. It's not really a failure of engineering, it's a failure to account for us, for human psychology. The wild inconsistency of that simpler, more common system creates what researchers have called the credibility trap. So let's go back to that fixed distance system, that simple tripwire. Because it has to be set for the fastest possible train that might come through, when a really slow freight train hits that exact same tripwire, well, the gates can come down for an incredibly long time. Researchers actually documented one crossing where the warning time ranged from a nail-biting 20 seconds all the way up to 16 minutes. Can you imagine waiting 16 minutes for a train you can't even see yet?
And this is exactly where the system starts to break down. You know, as researchers John Halkias and Lawrence Blanchard wrote way back in 1986, these long, unpredictable waits, they cause a loss of credibility. From a purely technical standpoint, the signal is working perfectly. But from a human standpoint, it feels broken. It's basically crying wolf.
Now, what's really amazing about this chart is how the accident data makes this whole credibility problem, well, visible. So this shows the percentage of accidents based on how much warning time drivers actually got. You see that first spike on the left at really short warning times, less than 20 seconds? And that makes sense, right? People just don't have enough time to react. But look at that second, wider spike. Accidents start going up again when the warning times get longer and more unpredictable. It's a perfect illustration of the problem. Drivers who've been burned by long waits in the past, they just start to distrust the signal.
It really is the classic boy who cried wolf story, just played out with steel and flashing lights. After you've been stuck waiting 5, 10, maybe even 15 minutes for a train that's crawling along, your brain starts to tell you that these signals aren't a reliable sign of immediate danger. You get impatient, your trust is gone, and you might just make a fatal decision to try and drive around those gates. Okay, so the good news is that engineers saw this problem and they designed a fix for it. That constant warning time system we talked about. It's pretty cool, actually. It's an engineering solution for what is really a human psychology problem.
So, as we touched on, this system is way more sophisticated. It doesn't just know a train is there. It's actively measuring its speed and its distance from the crossing.
Then it does the math in real time to trigger the signal at the perfect moment to give drivers a consistent, predictable, and therefore credible warning time, usually somewhere around 25 to 30 seconds. Every single time.
So, the billion-dollar question. Does it work? Oh yeah. A study compared crossings before and after they were upgraded from the old system to the new one and found a 28% reduction in accidents. Just by making the signal trustworthy, they made the crossing safer. That's a huge win for technology. But the story doesn't end there.
Because even with this nearly perfect engineering fix, a very strange problem just stuck around. You could almost call it a ghost in the machine. It's this lingering doubt that even the most advanced tech can't seem to get rid of on its own.
Take a look at this data. These pie charts break down why accidents happen at these gated crossings. You've got your usual suspects, stalled cars, people stopping on the tracks, things like that. But the biggest slice of the pie, for both the old and the new systems, is this category, accidents remaining unexplained. Almost half of all accidents couldn't be explained by obvious stuff like bad weather or a stalled engine. So what is going on?
Well, the clue to this whole mystery lies in the bigger picture. Back in 1984, when this research was done, there were over 12,000 of those old, unreliable, fixed-distance systems across America. But there were only about 4,000 of the new, reliable, constant warning ones. So think about it. For every one reliable signal a driver came across, they probably encountered 3 unreliable ones.
And that brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, the carryover effect. To you and me, a railroad crossing is just a railroad crossing, right? There's no sign that tells you which system is running the show. So all that distrust, that impatience, that memory of every long, annoying wait you've ever had at thousands of unreliable crossings, it gets carried over in your mind. You start to apply that same skepticism even to the perfectly safe, perfectly calibrated crossings. And that lingering distrust, that just might be the ghost that explains that huge slice of unexplained accidents.
Which leaves all of us with a pretty fascinating and maybe a slightly unsettling question. The credibility of the system isn't just about one single crossing. It's about the credibility of all of them, combined. So the next time those lights start flashing and the gates come down, what's going to be going through your head? Will you trust that signal completely, or will a tiny part of you, remembering every other long wait you've ever had, start to question the system?